Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Slaughter of Leith Hall by Lexie Conyngham, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. No doubt this would be the last of these mornings before winter set in properly, or the last when they could all be together like this, laughter steaming from their lips in the startling bright air. James Abernathy, their host here at Mayon, laughed more than anyone, which was no bad thing, Charlie Robb thought, for James Abernathy of Mayon was easily the worst shot of all of them. He was a great affable man, not good enough to make sure there was hot wine around the firing point for the servitors as well as for the gentlemen. Charlie Robb was fairly new to the game of attending his master John Leith in his business and his pleasure, but he had seen enough to know that servants were not always treated so generously, and he had already felt well disposed to Abernathy of Mayon, not that Abernathy of Mayon was ever likely to notice him. "Charlie, reload that, would you?" Charlie Robb shook himself and took the pistol from his master's outstretched hand. "Aye, sir." He was aware of John Leith watching him, a little absently, as he carefully packed the charge into the pistol. It was a new skill, and his master had taken pains to teach him. Charlie did not mind being watched. He would rather get it right, and the pistols frightened him. There was plenty to try to remember in this new job, and though he was doing his best, he was fairly sure there were mistakes he was making. But if he did make a mistake, John Leith would be kind enough in his correction. Leith nodded in satisfaction as Charlie handed the pistol back and returned to take his turn with the other gentlemen, their easy gossip punctuated by the metallic pops of shots in the clear air. Charlie Robb, relieved, felt a nudge at his elbow. "Aye, it's not so bad when your master's a good shot, eh?" Charlie grinned, turning. It was Liang Tam beside him, the black-haired, skinny servant of little Matthew Carratcher. Carratcher was notorious, his shooting almost as bad as Abernathy's, in practice like this at any rate. Liang Tam swore his master was a danger in battle when his blood was roused, but it was never clear whether Tam meant a danger to his enemies or his friends. Matthew Carratcher took his place now on the firing point, the pistol already wavering in his hand. There was a sudden interest from the crowd, both gentlemen and servitors. Was it time to duck? "He'd be better of a few draughts of that strong wine, I reckon," Liang Tam remarked judiciously. The gentleman, too far away to hear Liang Tam, burst out laughing nevertheless as Carratcher was reduced to seizing the pistol butt in both hands, squinting along the swinging barrel. He snatched at the trigger as though plucking a fiddle string, and a bottle 3 yards to the left of the one he was supposed to hit wobbled slightly. The gentleman cheered, and Liang Tam sighed. "Aye, well, at least I can never to put money on him." He rubbed at his scrawny upper arms. "Think they'll be much longer? I haven't felt my feet this last hour." "Another round at least, I'd say," said Charlie, glad to be asked his opinion. Gentlemen assumed that if they were friendly with each other, their servants would enjoy time spent in each other's company too. It was not always so, but Tam always seemed happy to see Charlie. "That's both of Mr. Leith's pistols loaded just now." Liang Tam nodded and stamped his feet dejectedly. "Aye," he acknowledged. "I've just reloaded Mr. Dalgarno's, too." He sighed. Charlie had heard the minister say that a man could not have two masters, but Liang Tam managed it. He served both Matthew Carratcher and his friend Walter Dalgarno. To Charlie, that gave him a dangerous, even a glamorous air, a man going against what the Kirk said with such ease. "And his turn's at least 2 away. See them too?" His voice dropped abruptly, the practiced hush of a servant not wanting his betters to hear his opinions. He made the slightest gesture at the next 2 gentlemen lined up to shoot. "You'd near take them for twins, eh?" Charlie looked at the 2 gentlemen, as he realized that Liang Tam's words were intended sarcastically. Lord Wat was the closer, and to see him you would wonder what he was doing amongst the others, for you could tell straight away that he was a superior being. The very lace at his collar was whiter and stiffer than anyone else's. The velvet of his coat looked, to Charlie's eye, freshly brushed, and even his boots shone despite a morning spent outdoors. His perfectly carved profile angled for a moment, turning to see where his servant was with his pistol. Flemish, of course, silverwork glinting, wood so polished it dazzled. Long, pale lids almost concealed his eyes, but he must have been able to see clearly enough, for he turned back, raised the pistol, and in the same instant it seemed the bottle on the distant branch shattered. Unsmiling, he returned the pistol to his servant and made a little bow to the next man, allowing him to take to the firing point. Lord Wat's twin he was not, unless one believed in fairies and changelings. Where Lord Wat was sombre stillness, Patrick Byers of Tonley was constantly in motion, and, from what Charlie Robb had heard, he needed to be, for Byers of Tonley was not short of enemies, some more powerful than others. He already had his pistol in hand, dangling at the end of an arm that seemed too long and undulating for his short body. Still joking with the other gentleman, he seemed to sidle up to the firing point, only half glancing at the target bottle, as if he hoped to take it by surprise. His eyes seemed to be everywhere, his grin mobile too. He fired in mid-conversation, catching the bottle on its flank. Charlie saw it spin frantically before it smashed. Byers congratulated himself heartily and danced away from the firing point again, allowing poor Mahan, their host, to take another wasted shot. At least the turns had been taken, and despite Mahan and Matthew Courager, there were no more bottles left to smash. Charlie hurried with the other servants to fetch the horses, tethered out of harm's way nearby to try what nourishment they could from the frosty grass. Caught here in a tilted valley in the loop of a Deveron river, they had been sheltered today, but the light was fading fast behind the hills. John Leith favored both Charlie and horse with a smile as they returned, and thanked Charlie for his boost up into the saddle. The gentlemen settled themselves, the servants following behind on foot, several carrying their master's pistol cases. Lord Wat rode ramrod straight, of course, a long-nosed hound following gracefully at his horse's heels. Charlie found himself tripping over Leith Hall spaniels, and Liang Tam caught his arm to stop him falling. Byers of Tonley, leaning dangerously to one side, poked Abernathy of Mahan sharply in the ribs and seemed to whisper something before touching his spurs to his horse's flanks and galloping off. With a cheer, a few of the others followed, racing towards Mahan House. Abernathy of Mahan, though, edged over to John Leith, neither of them out of a walking pace yet. 21st of December, they tell me, Charlie heard him say as he tried to sort the spaniels out. Mahan's voice was low and grave for once. At Campbell's Inn, in Aberdeen. Can you be there? Aye, said John Leith. He smiled, but Charlie noticed a serious look in his eyes. I mean, Strathbogie would have been handier, but I'll do my best, of course. Grand. Mahan reached a hand across and laid it briefly on Leith's shoulder. Not the best time of year to travel, it's true, but it cannot be helped. Secret, of course, and needn't say to you. Coming? Leith nodded, and the pair of them cantered off in the wake of the others. Liang Tam watched them, shrugging. Aye, and then we dander along behind. I hope they'll leave us a bite at dinner. You could tell the Abernathys had been at Mahan for a long while. A round tower with two wings snuggled at its foot sat with an eye to several directions and a view of the curling Deveron below. There was a walled garden outside a courtyard where Charlie could see rows of winter kale still dark amongst other withered stems, but the Mains farm must have been a distance away, and everything else here was curried safely into the courtyard. Stables, storerooms, brewhouse and bakehouse, the dairy, a narrow, defendable entrance to the house itself. It was all well enough looked after, but there was none of the expansion and improvement that was fashionable just now. At Leith Hall there had been all kinds of changes. Charlie half envied the servants here with a smaller house to run around. John Leith dismounted and gave his horse a farewell pat, and Charlie, blinking in the steam of all the gentlemen's mounts crowded together, waited his turn to find shelter, food, and water for Leith's horse. One or two of the gentlemen stood about the doorway, discussing the horses and how they had run on the way back. The others hurried inside the house, eager for warmth and refreshment. Charlie made a face into the horse's flank. He was starving. As soon as their horses were settled, he and Liang Tam fairly ran across the courtyard to the door, Tam laughing at their open desperation. Inside they found Mrs Abernathy, a neat wee body with a pretty face, lingering in the hallway to welcome even the servants and make sure they knew where to go. She must have had enough to do without hosting a whole army of her husband's friends here. She was cluttered about with children, the biggest surely not more than 8, 9, or 10, the smallest in her arms, not counting the one on its way. But she managed to find smiles for everyone and a kind word, and the warmest smile of all for her husband, touching his hand as he passed and smiled back. It gave Charlie a cozy feeling to counteract his hunger. At last they were drummed into a dining room, plainly decorated and with nothing that Charlie could see that looked as if it had been bought in the last 10 years, barring the food. There did not seem to be money here, but there was generosity, not perhaps the best of combinations, and the gentlemen were soon well served, with Mr Abernathy at the head of the long table, and his pretty wife at the foot, chatting to the men on either side of her with a good mixture of friendliness and propriety. Charlie knew it was not his place to do so, but he approved very much as he took his position with the servants in the room. But it would be a while yet before they could eat. While the gentlemen were settled with hot food and plenty of drink, the servants stood about, each near their master's chair, ready to attend, waiting their turn, stomachs wrenching at the fine smells coming from the master's table. After a while, and maybe faster than it should have, for Mahan was generous with his wine, the conversation amongst the gentlemen grew louder, the laughter less controlled, and when Mrs Abernathy went to kiss her husband good night and retire from the company, the servants were able to step back a bit and gossip too. As John Leith had been given a seat near the top of the table, close to his friend Abernathy, Charlie found himself next to Abernathy's own major domo. "Aye, 3 centuries, so I'm told," said Mahan's man, a whiskery, wrinkled body by the name of Pringle. His hair was so thick and straight that it stuck out of the loop of ribbon on the back of his head like a paintbrush. "King David came into the matter, you ken." Charlie, more interested in what he might get at his own dinner, was hazy about history. The only King David he had heard of was the one in the Bible. His eyes widened, impressed. Pringle nodded. "And like to be here 3 centuries or more to come, too," he added in satisfaction. "The master and the lady have 9 bairns between them, and another on the way." "Aye," said Charlie, feeling the need to stand up for Leith Hall. "My master's got the 3, and all boys." Pringle gave him a look as if to say Charlie had overstepped the mark competing with a more senior servant. "All boys, eh?" he said. "All boys. Aye, that's grand, I suppose. We're all gay fond of the wee lassies here, though, you ken." "I'm sure," said Charlie, reprimanded. Pringle looked away and drew a long-considered sniff. "I think we could clear the meats now and leave them their drink," he said, and signaled to some junior staff. "And we can start to take our ease, you can. Would you be wanting something to eat?" "Yes, please," Charlie said at once. "Well, find yourself a stool over yonder with the other men, and I'll have something brought in for you, everyone." A cluster of attendants had settled in a corner of the dining hall, Liang Tam amongst them. Charlie hurried over, not wanting to miss anything. In a moment they were brought broth, good bread, and boiled onions, and a cup of ale each, with a full jug left for them to start with. No one held back. They were all famished, and the food did not last long. Like rooks at a dead lamb, Charlie thought suddenly, and did not like the idea. He set his bowl aside and sipped at his ale. The gentlemen, for the most part, looked like sacks that had been untied. Most slumped back in their seats, while others leaned heavily on the table, fiddling with the remnants of meat or bread left behind, oblivious to the servants now. Charlie saw that John Leith was brighter-eyed than most, his face not quite so flushed, smiling at the others' jokes rather than laughing immoderately. Charlie felt a pride in his master. He could take his wine as well as being a competent shot. He let his gaze tour the rest of the table, seeing how the friends Carricher and Dalgarno were bickering over a jug quite near him. Byers of Tonley let his arm trail carelessly around the back of his neighbor's chair, almost fond, yet it put Charlie in mind of some kind of ivy, curling destructively around some innocent man, insidiously seeking his downfall. Charlie shook himself. Such fancies. He had had too much of that spiced wine while they were outside, he thought. He was not used to it. He turned to watch James Abernathy next to his master, always a more cheerful prospect. Abernathy of Mahan seemed to have had plenty to drink, but he had a strong grip still on sobriety, for he knew his duties as host. He poured another cup for John Leith from the jug in front of him, which Pringle, the majordomo, took to refill. John Leith took a sip, no more, then paused and raised the cup to Lord Wat with a friendly smile. Lord Wat, pale as ice on a water barrel, lifted his own glass in response. "A toast," cried Walter Dalgarno, seeing the movement. "A toast, gentlemen, to our good host, Abernathy of Mahan." The men rose and drank, most still steady enough on their feet. Mahan saluted them, then rose to respond. "To my good friends here, and to your lordship for gracing us with your presence," he said, raising his glass to Lord Wat. Lord Wat looked down his long nose, yet Charlie thought that with him that might just be a sign of approval. The gentlemen toasted Lord Wat, then each other, refilling their glasses with more generosity than accuracy. There was a gentle air of jollity already, and Charlie began to relax, putting aside whatever strange mood had taken him. A few more toasts were exchanged, tangled with jokes about Matthew Carricher's shooting and James Abernathy's even worse shooting, and Walter Dalgarno's debts, and Byers of Tonley's efforts to evade the government in all its guises. Then Lord Wat managed to make his voice heard through the chatter. "Gentlemen," he rose to his feet like a young birch sapling sprouting, "to the king!" "The king," the others obediently repeated. Then Byers of Tonley, a look of supreme mischief on his face, added clearly, "Over the water!" There was a moment's grim silence. "Go on, then," he urged them, grinning wildly. "A room full of you loyal Jacobites, and not one of you man enough to toast our true king." "Och, man," said James Abernathy, slipping back down into his seat. "Why did you have to bring that up?" "Aye, come on." Walter Delgarno made a face, too, and emitted a gentle belch. He scrambled in his waistcoat pocket and drew out a battered silver watch with one round dent in it that almost pierced the metal through. "That's all past. See, I keep a lock of his bonny hair in my watch case. It took a shot for me in America and all, so I can well believe he's magic. But now he's away in Italy. The man's lost altogether." "Till next time," said Byers, his voice soft but somehow deeply unpleasant. Charlie shivered and tried to look away, but something about Byers made it difficult to ignore him. John Leith cleared his throat.